Hello everyone! You've been waiting for it, or not, and it's time to rank the maximum damage and keyword infliction of egos this time. I've once more collected the data regarding all the current egos in the game and made the calculations to get those information. The document can still be found in the description. In fact, it's on the same document as for IDs, and I'll update both as new stuff is released. So again, I'll quickly go over the specifics and we'll get into the rankings for both categories. Let's start by something simple. If you haven't watched the previous video, I recommend watching it to understand some things, as I'm not gonna go over everything again. There I detail the math, as well as the rule specifications for calculations. If you haven't seen it or have forgotten, a quick reminder about the ladder. Calculations take into account all skill specifics and offense level difference based on the individual modifier. Poise egos take crit damage multiplier into account, like if they were base damage multipliers, but not base crit damage. Damage is rounded to the first decimal, and in this video to the nearest whole number. That's about it for the major points, but let me get into ego specifics. For IDs, I took passives into account, as they are part of the IDs kit, and can be activated for any skill, being independent from it. So I didn't take ego's passive into account then. But ego's passives have two particularities. The first is they are cumulative, therefore one ego can strengthen the others. Well, I just have to not count others, sure, easy. The second is they only apply after using said ego. Therefore, first activation will never have the passive active. So do I still take it into account or not, especially considering most egos passive have very weird conditionals and effects, far different from ID's passives, making calculations and situations often a mess, as well as most egos won't be spammed outside solo corrosions. Well, in the end, because I don't want to further complicate an already complicated situation, I decided to not count them. In terms of damage, for information, those are the ones most concerned, so you still know. In terms of status infliction, it's all over the place. So that was one of the two dilemmas I had. Yeah, another one, which is, do I count Mersault's Unimicala bleed activation? I mean, it's literally bleed damage, and I'm not counting status damage. The question also goes for Tremor Reverb, Dark Flame, and Butterflies. So I decided to not take them into account. Simple justification is that it isn't additional damage made by the kit and more support statuses for the archetypes, and that can break the system, TBH. Here are the insanely funny numbers for reference, so again, at least you know. Otherwise, most stuff stay about the same. However, egos being AoE most of the time, I ended up making two calculations for them. The total damage applied on the maximum number of targets, and the per slot damage, which is the damage for each targeted slot. To be fair, I just multiplied the latter by the attack rate almost every time. The same applies for status infliction, though for this one, there are numerous tricky cases, so I did a lot of manual calculations. For example, Rupture's Contempt House Awakening inflicts up to 15 bleed divided between the targets. So on 7 targets, there's 15 bleed inflicted, 2 per target and 1 at 3, but on only 1 target it's also 15 bleed inflicted. Well, in any case, most are calculated on the max number of targets. I mentioned for Yi Sang's Fail Bullet and Yoshu's Thorakalgia, which are not taking into account allies damage. One more time though before starting, again, this data should not be taken as a proper reference point for team building and evaluating egos, but more as research or entertainment. But enough preamble, let's get into the meat of things already. This time, you have the right not to 1, not to 2, not to 3, not to 5, but 4 tier lists. Lucky you! So yeah, I separated them into Awakening and Corrosion, as well as total and per slot damage. I spent more time on the total ones though, mostly highlighting the important per slot ones. So let's start with Awakening already. Drumrolls please. Oh, it's a proper one this time. And voila! Let's get this out of the way straight away. Dungeon Unimicala can be busted. In bleed at least. Well, it's made for damage, but the kicker really is the status, Polydipsy Rose. This thing can inflict 120 damage over 4 turns on 7 targets. Yeah, that's a ton and 2 halves. But don't get it wrong, even without it, it's still the top one, just less indecent. Then we find Otis Magic Bullet, which at 6 bullets becomes a massive AoE nuke, though at 7 is also a massive 1 target nuke. Then, before getting to the bulk of things, we find 3 more egos. Ryoshu's Contempt How, which can inflict massive damage on high resonance, Yi Sang's Fail Bullet, which does require a sacrifice to bring out all the shrapnel on enemies, and Mersault's Unimicala, who inflicts a lot of damage, even on AoE, due to Rose Wedge's explosion. And after that, a bunch of particular egos able to inflict conditionally high damage or other valves with high attack weight. Of note are obviously Ishmael's Wingbeat, for gambling addicts waiting for that 7 heads damage, Otis Dimension Shredder inflicting high damage once charged, Gregor's Christmas Nightmare, whose sanity conditions and 5 attack weights can turn into a big attack, Garden of Thorns being funnily not too far off due to its attack buffs, as well as Yi Sang's Sun Shower. Dawn's Electric Screaming can also do high AoE damage if you can charge it, while Rodion's Valve can inflict massive lust damage on a bleeding target. Then, as I said, base AoEs with high attack weight still accumulate quite a bit of damage on 7 targets, like Ishmael's Blind Obsession or Eclipse Binds. From there, damage gradually goes down, and from the sinners I haven't mentioned yet, Onglu and Sinclair not having a Valve are included. Onglu's highest potential lies in Lasso for Rupture, while Sinclair's is 9-2. Faust's Valve being single target and more utility does end up lower, Lasso being her highest damage in Rupture teams. Mentioned for Mersol's Chains of Others having the lowest damage due to its negative offense level, close to Snag Harpoon. But well, its utility is still one of the best. Mentioned for the highest of each rank as well, so Dawn's Dynamic Ala for Valves, Otis Magic Bullet for Ace, Dawn's Electric Screaming for Tet, and for Zayin it is Onglu's base ego, Land of Illusion, rolling 25 on 3 targets. Well, not like we're waiting for much damage from a Zayin, menacing foreboding. Now while we're still on the Awakenings, let's take a look at the damage per slot. This one will highlight egos whose high damage does not come from the number of targets, but the damage on each target, so the better ones for damage on a single target like a boss. So while both Yonemi Kala still have very high single target damage, the one taking the top spot is Ishmael's Wingbeat, with its potential 7 coins, the event of gambling addicts. Then Sanguine Desire is also in the top, and after the top 4, we find ones not necessarily mentioned before, notably Yi Sang's Dimension Shredder, with its high damage against Rupture targets by consuming charge, however much it needs, and Gregor's Solemn Lament, which can notoriously go even higher with Edgar Gregor's help. On the ones with lower attack weight but high damage, we can find Faust's Everlasting, Ryosho's Force Match Flame, and Sorakalja, Heathcliff's Fell Bullet, or even Onglu's Lasso. I mentioned for Magic Bullet, which still is on 6 bullet here, but its damage can go up to over 200 at 7 bullets, and it will be guaranteed fatal, so it can be doubled at least, just for the cost of her life. Now let's move on to Corrosions. Corrosions can vary depending on the egos, from similar version of Awakenings to completely different. They all tend to be mostly stronger AoEs or have stronger effects, but that's to be expected for the higher cost. So checking out the rankings, we can see the thresholds are different, with a lot being higher. The top 2 is still uncontested though. Contempt How is relegated to single target this time, with stronger effects, especially for bleed. On the ones gaining the most damage from corroding, Dawn's Electric Screaming does get way higher, with easier conditions as well. Ishmael's Christmas Nightmare and Gregor's Solemn Lament gain high total damage from becoming 5 attack weight as well, and so does Mersol's Electric Screaming, going from a support move on Awakening to a lesser damage, more debuff version of Dawn's ego, his Regret ego doing something similar. It's also the case for other egos, but I'm not gonna mention all of them, the rankings being overall similar. On the funny opposite side, Wingbeat gets less overall damage from its AoE, like Contempt already mentioned, or Sanguine Desire, and Gregor's Garden of Thorns inflicting debuffs on hit rather than granting buffs before results in it doing less damage. The lowest ones end up being Ishmael's Roseate Desire, with a lack of AoE or damage multipliers. Also for each category, Valve's highest is obviously Dawn's Yonemi Kala, Ace is still Magic Bullet, Tet is still Dawn's Electric Screaming, so nothing changing so far, and Zayin's is Legerdemain, with Maggots adding quite a bit of additional damage over a few turns. Let's wrap up the damage part with Corrosion's per slot damage. Here, no Wingbeat, so Dawn's Yonemi Kala takes first, though Magic Bullet with 7 bullets is right below, being still pretty high at 6. Ryosho's Contempt How can be found high again there, at the same damage as Force Match Flame. Then we find Thorakalja, Regret, Electric Screaming, etc. As I said, Corrosions tend to be stronger AoEs, or become AoEs, so there isn't as many outliers in terms of high damage compared to Awakenings. They are still mostly stronger in terms of AoEs at the very least, but as I said, at a higher cost, at least in sanity, and potentially scene resources when overclocking. So now that the damage part is done, let's get on to the second part. I declare officially reopened the Keyword Awards Ego Edition! Yay! So again, I'll highlight the egos providing the highest infliction/gain for each keyword. But before highlighting egos, let me highlight my problems here. So first, quite a few egos inflict the keywords through the passives, but I'm not counting passives, so I'll just mention them when relevant. But the real problem is I have 4 categories, Awakening or Corrosion, and Total or per slot, and that's a lot of things to mention. So I'll be highlighting only the first of each category. It's still 8 mentions considering potency and count, and again, if you're curious, data is in the description. There, problem solved, so let's get on to it. Starting with Burn. Fun fact, Burn might have been the keyword with the most egos dedicated to it, contrary to ideas, until this season at least. So for potency, Otis Magic Bullet is a bit insane. It inflicts burn equal to Magic Bullet, so at 6 it inflicts 6 burn. Except the coin can also be reused 2 times, so it will inflict 18 burn on 7 targets, on both Awakening and Corrosion. So it just takes every spot. Mention for Other Blossom Star was still inflicting quite a bit, and even more so with passive. For count, so about Magic Bullet. Inflicts count on Corrosion. Magic Bullet divided by 2. So 3 per coin, 9 per target, and 7 targets, so yeah, it takes both. It's not an Awakening, so it will have to be another one. And only 2 other egos inflict burn count in fact. Dawn's Lifetimes 2, just 3 per target, and Mercil's Capote, which is 3 count on 5 enemies, if you stagger the target, with a Tremor burst. It's a mess, but it will take the total and share the per slot. Though it might take Corrosion's per slot. You want to know why? Well, it inflicts 4 burn count on the same condition, but it's 3 attack weight, so they can technically proc 3 times, making 12 potential count on the unit and 60 total. So I guess it will take it as well. And it's on random units, not enemies. So if you ever manage to get a perfect 12 count per enemy on 5 enemies with its ego one day, you should have played the lottery instead. Now on to Bleed. Fun fact, Bleed might be the keyword with the most egos dedicated to it now, and I did as well to be fair. For potency, you're expecting me to say Dungeon and Mekala again, no? Well yeah, on total for both. For Awakening, it can inflict 4 per target, so on 7 it adds up, and the competition isn't too high. For Corrosion, it can inflict 22 bleed per target. Yeah, that much. So on 7 targets, it really adds up. So you're expecting me to say that it also has the per slot win, right? Well, that's without taking into account Contempt How, whose Corrosion can inflict 25 bleed on a single target with enough resonance. For Awakening though, you might have forgotten it, but Wingbeat is a bleed ego. It can inflict between 1 to 4 bleed on its second coin, and with 6 reuse at 4 bleed, it can get pretty high as well. I mentioned for Sanguine Desire passive, which can double Rodia's bleed potency infliction. For count though, it's a bit cheating, but I'll give Sanguine Desire the per slot one at least. It doesn't inflict bleed count, but by preventing it of being consumed, it's equivalent to inflicting as many as the target would have lost, which can be a lot depending on the situation. And the main reason is, there's almost no Awakening inflicting bleed count. No, really, X-Nails inflicts 3 nails, and the only other one inflicted bleed count is Dawn's Wishing Cane, at 4 per target. Yeah, don't be surprised we're lacking bleed count more than Blood Fiends lacking bleed themselves. I'd still give her the total for the honor because of AoE. For Corrosion, there's no Sanguine Desire shenanigan, but the situation is slightly better. Contempt How inflicts 5 on its target, but Legitimate inflicts 6 maggots, which is the equivalent to 6 bleed count, so it takes the per slot. It won't take the total though. I did say no Sanguine Desire shenanigans, but it still inflicts 3 bleed count on Corrosion, with 7 attack weight, so it will take it. That's some more funnier than I did so far, but let's slightly speed up. On to Tremor. Results are varied. For potency, Otis Binds take the Awakening and Corrosion totals by inflicting 6 potency over 7 targets. On per slot, Faust's Everlasting is the most known ego for Tremor infliction, and for a good reason, inflicting 20 potency and count on Awakening. So I just put her for count already. However, on Corrosion, her infliction rate is reduced due to being AoE, and leaves the place to Dawn's Fluid Sac, inflicting 10 potency per target. For count, even if 20 seems like a lot, Corrosion's effervescent corrosion adds up to 28 on awakening, and none on corrosion. Funny considering the name. Meanwhile, Faust Everlasting does get back the top on corrosion because of AoE. Lastly, because Tremor count infliction aren't too high in corrosion, it also takes a per slot rank. I mentioned for Mersault's Capote, inflicting as much potency as burn on the target, which can technically be 99. Next, for Rupture, half of them being charged as well, funnily enough. Quite a few inflict Rupture through passive, so I mentioned beforehand to the most well known for count notably, aka Yi Seng's Dimension Shredder and Otis Ebony Stem. But for potencies rankings, Ongu's Lasso actually takes all of them, thanks to, well, Lasso, its status, which can inflict 5 potency per turn, beating Ebony Stem's Corrosion's total infliction. For count, it's more complicated. Again, I didn't take into account Rupture consumption, though it's less of a problem here, most Rupture Egos having 1 coin. This time, it's Gregor's AEDD that takes most of the wins, with Spark Discharge that can be converted into 15 count. The only exception is on Corrosion Dodo, Otis Dimension Shredder being able to inflict 4 dimensional rifts on 7 targets. I mentioned for Onglu's Dimension Shredder as well, also inflicting quite a bit of Rupture count with it. Now thinking, this one is more interesting, having inflictions here and there. So for potency, Escliffe's Binds takes Awakening total with its 7 attack weight. For per slot, it's Yi Seng's Bygone Days with its 15 sinking infliction at 6 gloom resonance. It is spread between targets, but that means on one target it will be 15. For corrosion, there's actually a tie. Yeah. For both total and per slot. Between Rhyme Shank, yeah, you might have guessed this one, and Dawn's Fruit Sack. Yeah, you might have forgotten this one. Both inflict 10 potency on 3 targets. Well, for count, Rhyme Shank takes both, and Awakenings as well, because there really isn't much sinking count infliction in Egos. Another mention for Yi Seng's Bygone Days though, not inflicting count, but having a very funny interaction with Echoes of the Manor, being able to inflict a ton of count. Now for the 2 next keywords, since Poise and Charge gains aren't always linked to targets and given to allies, I decided to make per slot and total the gain respectively on the Sinner and on the whole team, still also on one target or multiple. Probably fair. So for Poise first, the least represented keyword. There's actually 6 of them, so that's easy. Yi Seng's Fell Bullet is the one giving the most potency to its owner and also to its allies, in Awakening at least. It also takes the Corrosion's total spot, but Ryoshu's Corroded Blind Obsession can actually grant her very high Poise in exchange for charge. So if one day we get a Poise charge ID for Ryoshu, that would be cool, though it's not a combination I'm expecting anytime soon. For count, Otis Sunshower is the one giving the most Poise count to its owner, being at 7 on use. It is only equaled by Ishmael's Blind Obsessions on Corrosion, so they both take total spots due to a lack of count otherwise. However, the latter can give very high amounts of count to allies on Awakening, even if random. A special mention for the still upcoming at this time Faust Thorakalgia, who is probably gonna blow all numbers. Finally for Charge, half of them being Rupture as well, funnily enough. I did take into account Ego's consumption here. Most giving a lot of charge don't usually consume it though, so that's barely an issue. And since there is none giving charge potency, it being tied to ID's passive, that's a skip, though Otis Dimension Shredder is made for it, consuming everything. So once more, Spark Discharge is counted as charge count, so it takes both per slots. However, both Mersault's Electric Screaming and Dawn's Telepole are egos made to electrify the whole team. Mersault's ego can actually give slightly more to allies on high NV res on Awakening, however, since it isn't a support anymore in Corrosion, Dawn's Telepole takes the last win by a lot, giving 12 charge count to every allies and 22 to herself. Its passive also giving some, by the way. And last, but not least, I have to obviously mention the 8th keyword. They are shy to introduce it more because they know it's overpowered and can break the game, which is why only a few egos have it at the moment. I'm obviously talking about Curse, and Secret Nace takes all of it, it's great! Woohoo! And that concludes the awards. Status infliction for egos are pretty inconsistent. A lot of older egos tend to have a lot of small infliction when they still struggle to find a clear direction. Now, well, it's even weirder, or at least Rupture is being bullied. But even then, egos have a tendency to highly increase the power of an archetype. Some are with Infliction, like I mentioned, notably on Sinking, but others are just archetype defining, like Otis Magic Bullet or Onglu's Cavernous Wailing. Poise and Charge are also keywords that like a lot having inter-IDs support, Poise especially due to the struggle of keeping it up, which is why Roshu's Thoracalgia and her Nebulizer Beta are a boon to the archetype, even if it was barely mentioned there due to it being a passive, and Foul's version should be very good as well. But overall, between egos supporting keywords and those benefiting from it, it's hard to predict how they will make them influence those in the future, though I'm pretty sure most egos from now on will also be tied to them. In conclusion, I'd like to come back to the damage part. As I said, some egos are benefiting from keywords, and for about a bit more of a season, they have been introducing more and more egos based around damage, notably with multiple coins, and gaining strength in the proper archetype. This makes a situation of egos that can be used as additional skill trees for high damage, like lassos for example. But egos and IDs being separated, there is not always a good combination between the two, and some egos are left in the mud despite having high potential. This was the case for Sanguine Desire for example. And still this one is kinda extremely useful in Bleed. So for the one not helping the keyword but benefiting from it, like Lasso again, it's hard to justify them most of the time. But a question for you all. Does it mean they are just useless, or are they just potential waiting for an occasion to shine? There's a whole discussion as well between IDs and egos benefiting versus supporting an archetype, but I'll leave it at that for now. Feel free to comment about it. I still think quite a few of them are useful, and I think latest Envy Pekatula fights kinda proved it, or at least gave them a moment in the spotlight. Talking about that, I'll be preparing for Railway. Yay, next one is almost here! Here we go, another run, prices to play. And that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Final message, there probably won't be more analysis videos like this one for a while, but I'll still be doing Limbus or Project Moon content. But there's a bunch of stuff I wanna try in the near-ish future. I will be doing quite a few streams on Railway 5 though, first try optimization for a guide, and then I wanna try to go for lowest turns, or at least close to. So subscribe if you wanna check it out, and check the community tab for news on Mondays. In any case, see you next time, and keep your sanity high in this slow descent into the inferno.